Reversing Nigeria's food security gain, a simple call to the current administration. Looking at the history, one will understand that the previous administration, especially the administration of President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan and that of President Muhammadu Buhari, did came up with a number of policies to encourage local production, in terms of the farming, processing, logistics, distribution, and transportation, all of that. They did came up with a lot of policies, incentives to ensure that they were able to boost the local production by also trying to see how they can bring in FDI, and to also see how they can encourage local production by also trying to encourage local investors to invest in the agricultural sector. If you look critically, you will understand that the agricultural sector at that time, to a large extent, was even doing far better than any other sector, except for the oil and gas sector. So these policies that were made by the previous administration, especially the last administration, which is that of President Muhammadu Buhari, was about to a large extent, trying to see how they can close the border, restriction on importation of certain essential staple food, and to also see how they can give in credit facilities to the local investors, and to also see how they can be able to encourage local farmers to increase their outputs. As you know, over 90% of all the food that is produced in Nigeria is actually made by the small household farmers, because they are the one that constitute over 90% of this food that is being produced in Nigeria. So we also saw that, because of the restriction of this importation of food items, especially when it comes to rice, maize, and soya beans, these again also boost local production, because I know a lot of people, personally, I know a lot of farmers who went into these three staple food, and we saw increase. And but for the case of this, for the purpose of this discussion, specifically I'll be talking about rice production and the boost we saw. We saw a boost from 2.7 million metric ton per annum to over 6 million metric ton per annum. At a certain point in time, a lot of Nigerians will never want to consume locally made rice because they believe it was full of stones and all of that, and you just can't be able to eat without, swelling or without digesting or experiencing that there is something, that you're just not going to like in that rice, maybe in terms of the sharp stones and all of that. But local production, because these investors were able to have access to credit facilities, they were able to, increase their output. They were able to ensure that the rice is looking far much better than it was. And for the first time, we're seeing that Nigerians now prefer to even consume locally made rice instead of the imported rice. So that is a very serious gain. And that was actually a very serious gain. So with that, we saw increase in the number of jobs that were created in the agricultural sector, because from farming, now we are now seeing a boost in also the processing, logistics, and transportation. So rice production in Nigeria increased, and also is the farming, of course, the farming and the processing. So a number of jobs were created, and we saw a boost in the economy of the rural sectors. And then we also saw that the transportation and all of that, everything actually increased. Even the GDP increased as at that time. So this was a very, very good policy that was made by that administration. Okay, it was a very, very good thing. So, but just like I said, these policies, and I'm going to talk about it, these policies were driven by the restriction of the importation of certain food commodities. That was one of the major things that led to this boosts. All right, remember that. So, and the environment, the government was able to create a business-friendly environment for the agricultural sector. We remember that very administration was always talking about, why should we import what we can produce locally in Nigeria? And of course, it makes sense to say that Nigerians, we really need to try as much as possible to invest in the agricultural sector, because we are a population of more than 200 million people. How do you survive if you can't feed yourself? So in addition to that, we saw value chain investment, which flourished. We saw mainstream agri businessmen. Of course, a lot of people came into the agricultural sector. particularly in the rice sector, because there is nothing that Nigerians consume more than rice. They can consume rice morning, afternoon, evening. If you have a visitor, if you're expecting visitors, you want to prepare, you want to give them rice. So Nigerians, we consume a lot of rice. So people went into rice production. So integrated rice mills made a lot of profit. They made huge lot of profit. Okay, and that was, of course, obviously the reason why there was an increase in the production of rice from 2.7 million metric ton in 2010 to over 6 million metric ton in 2018 to 2019. So this is very important that we try to look at history, okay, so that we know our current circumstances. What I'm trying to arrive at is that this momentum was not sustained by this current administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, because obviously the price of rice was increasing and a lot of Nigerians are hungry, and that is the debate we're going to be talking about maybe tomorrow or next. I'm going to make video on that. So currently that policies have been reversed. Our borders are now opened. People can now be able to import rice and some of the staple food, especially maize and millet, soybeans and rice and a lot of that. These obviously have made the price of rice to crash terribly, in ways that our investors are now losing. A lot of people that invested in the rice mill, in fact, a lot of rice mills currently are shutting down, especially in Kano, Jigawa, and Kaduna states. They are currently shutting down operation because they can no longer be able to meet up with some of this locally made, with some of this foreign imported, with some of this imported rice. This rice, of course, as you know, they are unregulated. You really are not sure of their health. Just like we're not going to talk about that right now, but right now these rice mills are currently shutting down operation, especially because of the increase in the cost of production in terms of the electricity bill, water bill, security, and all of that. So, and now you are importing because our borders are now currently open. Okay, but what is disheartening is the fact that there are a lot of people who were able to convince the current administration that this is the best policy. Of course, you can do that, but not in the long term. In the long term, you still have to rely on these local farmers. You have to try as much as possible to see how you can invest in the Nigerian agricultural sector so that they can be able to compete with those ones that you are trying. I'm trying to make sure that this video is not long. Tomorrow I'm going to continue from this. Thank you.